At 3:14 in the afternoon on July 29, 1944, Fritz Langanke heard the sound that every German soldier in Normandy had learned to fear. A low, distant rumble coming from the northwest, growing louder by the second. He was 25 years old, crouched inside the turret of his Panther tank on a narrow road near the village of Roncey, trapped in a column of vehicles that stretched for well over a kilometre in both directions. There was no way forward and no way back. The road was choked with half-tracks, trucks, artillery pieces and tanks. Nothing was moving. Nothing could move. And that sound in the distance was getting closer. Langanke had been a soldier for 7 years. He had joined the SS in November 1937, posted to the 10th Company of the Germania Standarte when he was just 18 years old. He had fought in Poland in September 1939, learning the brutal realities of combat while his country swept across Europe. He had fought in France in 1940, watching the vaunted French army collapse in 6 weeks. He had fought in the Balkans in March 1941, helping to crush Yugoslavia and Greece, and he had fought on the Eastern Front from June 1941 onward, where he had witnessed horrors that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He had been at the gates of Moscow in the winter of 1941, when German forces came within sight of the Kremlin before being thrown back by Soviet counterattacks and temperatures that dropped to minus 40 degrees. He had survived the grinding defensive battles of 1942 as the Red Army pushed westward. He had fought at Kursk in the summer of 1943, the largest tank battle in history, where German hopes of victory in the east were finally destroyed. He had earned the Iron Cross Second Class in December 1940 and the Iron Cross First Class in December 1941, awards given for bravery under fire. But he had never experienced anything like this. Within minutes, the sky above the column would fill with American fighter bombers. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. The Germans called them Jabos, short for Jag Bomber, meaning hunter bomber. For the next 6 hours, those aircraft would methodically destroy everything on that road. When it was over, 66 tanks, 204 vehicles, and 11 artillery pieces would lie in smoking ruins. And Fritz Langanke would be one of the few who escaped to tell the story. What happened in that 6-hour window on a July afternoon would demonstrate with terrible clarity what happens when an army loses control of the sky. The disaster at Roncey did not happen by accident. It was the direct result of a chain of events that began 4 days earlier, with the largest concentrated aerial bombardment in military history. Operation Cobra launched on July 25, 1944. 7 weeks after the D-Day landings, Allied forces remained stuck in the dense hedgerow country of Normandy. The bocage, as the French called it, was a nightmare for attacking armies. Ancient hedgerows, some planted by Roman farmers over 1,000 years ago, divided the landscape into thousands of small fields. Each hedgerow was a natural fortress, a mound of earth sometimes 2 meters high topped with dense vegetation that could conceal machine gun nests and anti-tank guns. The roots of the hedges bound the earth together so tightly that even tank shells could not penetrate them. American infantry had been bleeding for every meter of ground. Units that should have advanced kilometers were measuring their progress in hundreds of meters. Casualties mounted, morale suffered. The grand strategy of the Normandy campaign called for a rapid breakout into the open country of central France, but the bocage had turned the campaign into a bloody stalemate. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 1st United States Army, devised a plan to break the deadlock. He would concentrate overwhelming air power on a narrow section of the German front near the town of St. Lo, which American forces had finally captured on July 18th after weeks of savage fighting. The target area would be a rectangle 5 kilometers wide and 2 kilometers deep, directly in front of the American lines. Nearly 3,000 aircraft would participate in the bombardment. Heavy bombers would carpet the German positions with over 3,000 tons of high explosives. Medium bombers would add another 1,000 tons. Fighter bombers would follow up with bombs, rockets, and strafing attacks. Then American armored divisions would punch through the shattered defenses and race into the open country beyond. Bradley believed that concentrated air power could accomplish in hours what his infantry had failed to achieve in weeks. The German defensive positions would simply cease to exist. The troops manning them would be killed, wounded, or so stunned by the bombardment that they could not resist the armored assault that followed. The weather delayed the operation for a day. A preliminary bombardment on July 24th went badly wrong when some bombs fell short into American lines, killing 25 soldiers. But Bradley pressed forward. On the morning of July 25th, the skies cleared enough for the full bombardment to proceed. The attack began at 1100 hours. The first wave consisted of over 1,500 B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator heavy bombers, flying in formations that stretched across the sky from horizon to horizon. The sight was awe-inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. Each bomber carried up to 8,000 pounds of explosives. The bombardiers had been told to aim for coloured smoke markers placed by Pathfinder aircraft, but the markers drifted in the wind. Some crews could not see their targets through the smoke and dust raised by earlier bombs. They dropped anyway. The effect on the ground was apocalyptic. German soldiers, who survived the bombardment, described it as being inside an earthquake that would not stop. The concussion from the explosions could be felt kilometers away. The ground heaved and buckled. Entire defensive positions vanished into craters. Communications wires were cut. Headquarters were obliterated. Men were buried alive by falling earth. The Panzer Division, one of Germany's elite armoured formations, happened to be positioned directly in the target zone. This was particularly bad luck for the Germans and particularly good luck for the Allies. Panzer was not just any division. It had been formed from instructors and demonstration units of the German Army's Panzer training schools, making it one of the most experienced and capable formations in the entire Wehrmacht. Its soldiers knew their equipment intimately. Its tactics were honed to perfection. In the bocage fighting, Panzer had been a formidable obstacle. After the bombardment, Panzer effectively ceased to exist. Its commander, Generalleutnant Fritz later wrote that the division was finally annihilated. He described seeing men wandering in shock, unable to respond to orders. He described tanks flipped onto their backs by the concussion of nearby bomb hits. He described the eerie silence that followed the bombardment, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of burning vehicles. The bombardment killed about 1,000 German soldiers outright. It wounded many more. It destroyed or damaged much of Panzer remaining equipment. But perhaps most importantly, it shattered the psychological cohesion of the German defense. Soldiers who had fought through years of war, who had survived battles from Moscow to Kursk, found themselves unable to resist the combination of air power and armor that followed. The bombardment was not without cost to the Americans. The same problems with drifting markers and poor visibility that had plagued the July 24th attack recurred on the 25th. Short bombs killed 111 American soldiers and wounded 490. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, who had been observing the attack from a forward position with the 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry. McNair was the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theatre. His death was kept secret for weeks to avoid providing propaganda material to the Germans. Despite the tragic friendly fire casualties, the bombardment achieved its purpose. American infantry began advancing at 1100 hours, moving from crater to crater across the devastated landscape. They expected heavy resistance. They found only scattered survivors, many of them too dazed to fight. By late afternoon, American tanks were pouring through gaps in the German line. The breakthrough had begun. Over the next 3 days, the German defense in the western sector of Normandy collapsed. American armored columns raced south and west, threatening to encircle German forces in the Cotentin Peninsula. The town of Coutances fell on July 28th. American spearheads reached the outskirts of Avranches. the gateway to Brittany and the open country beyond. The German 7th Army, responsible for defending the western sector, faced annihilation. General Paul Hauser, commander of the 7th Army, ordered a general retreat. German forces were to pull back to a new defensive line running through the villages of Brehull, Sarences and Percy. The Germans called this the Weiße Linie, the White Line. If they could reach it and establish defenses before the Americans cut them off, they might stabilize the front. But the order came too late. American armored columns were already cutting the escape routes. The 2nd Armored Division, known as Hell on Wheels, pushed toward Notre-Dame-de-Senilly from the south. The 3rd Armored Division, the Spearhead, drove toward Coutances from the east, elements of both. Divisions met and merged, forming an encirclement around the retreating German forces. The trap was closing, and thousands of German soldiers were caught inside. Fritz Langanke was with the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, one of the units caught in the tightening noose. By late July, Das Reich had been ground down in weeks of defensive fighting. The division that had been a formidable fighting force was now a shadow of its former strength. Its tank regiment had lost most of its vehicles. Its infantry regiments were badly under strength. Now it was being herded into a pocket around the small town of Roncey, along with remnants of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Gotz von Berlichingen, what remained of the 91st Luftland Division, and the 6th Parachute Regiment commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich August von der Heiter. The 91st Luftland Division was present only as remnants. The division had been largely destroyed near Cherbourg on June 22, 1944, just weeks after D-Day, and would be formally disbanded on August 10. The survivors caught in the Roncey Pocket represented some of the last organized elements of this shattered formation. The 6th Parachute Regiment had originally been attached to the 91st Luftland and had fought with distinction since the invasion began. Its commander, von der Heiter, was one of the most capable German officers in Normandy, but even his leadership could not change the fundamental tactical situation. His men, like all the Germans trapped in the pocket, were helpless against enemies they could not see and weapons they could not evade. Langanke commanded a platoon of 4 Panther tanks in the 2nd Company of SS Panzer Regiment II. The Panther was one of the finest tanks of the war, widely considered the best medium tank produced by any nation during the conflict. It combined the hitting power of a heavy with the mobility of a medium. Its long-barreled 75mm gun could penetrate the armor of any Allied tank at ranges exceeding a kilometer. Its frontal armor was thick enough to stop most Allied anti-tank rounds. In a stand-up tank battle, the Panther was king, but Normandy was not a stand-up tank battle. The bocage negated the Panther's advantages. Its long gun was awkward in the confined spaces between hedgerows. Its sophisticated suspension required careful maintenance that was difficult to perform under constant air attack. And on the narrow Norman roads, hemmed in by hedgerows and unable to maneuver, even the mighty Panther was just another target for Allied aircraft. Langanke had learned about air power the hard way during his time in Normandy. The Allies controlled the skies absolutely. German aircraft appeared only rarely, usually at dawn or dusk when visibility was poor. During daylight hours, the sky belonged to the enemy. Any vehicle that moved on the roads during the day risked attack. Columns learned to disperse into the hedgerows at the first sound of aircraft engines, but dispersion took time, and sometimes the planes came too fast. On the evening of July 28, Langanke received orders to attach his platoon to the reinforced 3rd Battalion of SS Regiment Deutschland for an attempt to break through the American encirclement. The plan was to move at night, when American aircraft could not see them. They would push south toward the German lines, hoping to find a gap in the American positions. That same day, the 2nd SS Panzer Division lost its temporary acting commander. SS Obersturmbannführer Christian Tixen had only taken over 4 days earlier, on July 24th, replacing the wounded SS Brigadeführer Heinz Lammerding. Tixon had commanded the 2nd SS Panzer Regiment since November 1943 and was a highly experienced officer. He was killed by machine gun fire from an American M4 Sherman of the 67th Armored Regiment when his Kubelwagen attempted to run a roadblock at the Trelly Crossroads near the Saint-Denis to Gavray Road Junction, close to a farm called La Nourricerie. His body was looted of identification by American soldiers. French civilians later moved it to the Haute-Vents Crossroads at Cambrai, where he was initially buried as an unknown German officer. He would not be identified until 1967 through unique dental work from a grenade wound he had received in Russia in 1942. The column set out after dark on July 28. Progress was agonizingly slow. The roads were clogged with retreating vehicles from dozens of different units, all trying to escape the closing trap. Trucks filled with wounded soldiers jammed alongside ammunition carriers. Artillery tractors towing field guns competed for road space with half-tracks carrying infantry. Units became mixed together in the darkness. Officers lost contact with their men. Men lost contact with their units. At one point in the darkness, Langanke's commander, Major Helmut Schreiber of the 3rd Battalion, jumped off their Panther to investigate a blockage ahead. A tractor pulling a large artillery piece had broken down, completely blocking the road. Schreiber ran forward to find out what was happening. He crossed the Hambai to Roncey Road, an intersection that lay just ahead of their position. He never came back. American troops had established a roadblock at that intersection. They had a Sherman tank dug in behind a hedgerow and infantry covering the approaches. Schreiber either walked into an ambush and was killed, or he was captured before he could make it back. Langanke never learned which. From that moment, the men in the column looked to Langanke for leadership. There were other men in the column who technically outranked him, sergeants and junior officers from various units, but in the chaos and darkness, rank mattered less than presence. Langanke was there, visible on his tank, ready to act. The others followed him, because he seemed to know what to do. The column crawled forward through the night. Burned-out vehicles blocked the road at intervals, victims of earlier American air attacks or artillery strikes. Engineers worked to push wrecks aside or fill in craters. Infantry stumbled along in the ditches, too exhausted to march properly but too frightened to stop. Somewhere ahead, American tanks and infantry waited. Somewhere behind, more Americans were closing in. The noose was tightening. By dawn on July 29, Langanke's group had made only a few kilometers of progress. They passed through the village of Saint-Martin-de-Senilly just as the morning mist began to lift. The village was largely destroyed, its buildings reduced to rubble by artillery fire and air attacks. Civilians had fled or were hiding in cellars. The only living things visible were the German soldiers passing through and the occasional cow wandering among the ruins. Beyond the village, the road became completely blocked. A massive traffic jam had developed where several roads converged. Vehicles were stacked 3 abreast in places, their drivers desperately trying to find a way forward. Langanke could see the mass of vehicles stretching ahead for nearly 2 kilometers. Trucks, half-tracks, tanks, artillery pieces, horse-drawn wagons, all jammed together in a chaotic mass. Nothing could move forward. Nothing could move back. The fields on either side of the road were too soft and boggy for heavy vehicles. The hedgerows prevented movement across country, and the sun was climbing into a clear blue sky. Langanke understood immediately what this meant. Clear skies meant American aircraft. American aircraft meant death. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had been bled white in the years of war. Its fighter pilots had been decimated in the battles of attrition over Germany and the Channel. Its bombers had been destroyed attacking England and defending German cities. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe could not contest Allied air superiority over Normandy. German aircraft appeared only rarely, usually at dawn or dusk. During the day, the sky belonged completely to the Americans and British. Some German soldiers refused to believe how bad the situation had become. They remembered the days when the Luftwaffe had ruled the skies over Poland and France. They expected German aircraft to appear at any moment to drive away the Allied planes and allow them to move freely. Those soldiers learned quickly. German aircraft were not coming. The sky was enemy territory. The first P-47s appeared shortly after 3 in the afternoon. Pilots from the 405th Fighter Group had been flying armed reconnaissance missions in support of the breakthrough. They were looking for targets of opportunity, German vehicles, or troop concentrations that could be attacked. What they found near Roncey was beyond anything they had expected. A column of German vehicles stretching for nearly 2 kilometers, completely immobilized, unable to disperse or take cover. One of the American pilots later described it as a fighter pilot's paradise. The P-47 Thunderbolt was one of the most formidable ground attack aircraft of the war. The Americans called it the Jug, a nickname that came from its massive barrel-shaped fuselage. Some said Jug was short for Juggernaut, a reference to its unstoppable power. Others said it simply looked like a milk jug. Either way, the name stuck. The Thunderbolt was designed by Republic Aviation under the leadership of Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant who had become one of America's foremost aircraft designers. Kartveli had been working on fighter design since the 1930s, but the P-47 was his masterpiece. It was built around the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine that produced over 2,000 horsepower. This was the largest and most powerful aircraft engine in operational service, and it gave the Thunderbolt performance that no other American fighter could match at high altitude. The aircraft was massive by fighter standards. Empty, it weighed nearly 10,000 pounds. Fully loaded with fuel, bombs, and ammunition, it could weigh over 17,000 pounds, making it one of the heaviest single-engine fighters ever built. That weight was not wasted. The Thunderbolt carried 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, with 425 rounds per gun. This gave the pilot 3,400 rounds of ammunition, enough to sustain fire for over a minute at maximum rate. At close range, those 8 machine guns could saw a truck in half. The Thunderbolt could also carry external ordnance. Pylons under the wings and fuselage could mount bombs weighing up to 1,000 pounds each for a maximum bomb load of 2,500 pounds. Later versions also carried rockets, either the M8 4.5-inch rockets or the larger 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. These weapons turned the Thunderbolt from a fighter into a flying tank destroyer. The aircraft's construction was remarkably robust. The air-cooled radial engine could absorb battle damage that would have destroyed a liquid-cooled inline engine. Pilots returned from missions with cylinders shot away, oil lines severed, propeller blades damaged. The engine kept running. The cockpit was protected by armor plate that could stop small arms fire and shell fragments. The self-sealing fuel tanks reduced the risk of fire. German anti-aircraft gunners learned to respect and fear the Jug. It took hits that should have brought it down and kept flying. For the men trapped on the road near Roncey, there was no escape. The hedgerows that had sheltered German defenders for weeks now became a prison. Vehicles could not leave the road. The fields on either side were too soft, too boggy, hemmed in by those ancient earthen walls. Some drivers tried anyway, attempting to drive their vehicles into the fields to disperse and take cover. They immediately became stuck in the soft ground. Their vehicles joined a traffic jam, now immobilized in the mud rather than on the road. They were still targets. Some soldiers abandoned their vehicles and tried to hide in the hedgerows on foot. The hedgerows provided concealment but not protection. American pilots could see movement in the vegetation. They strafed the hedgerows as well as the road, killing soldiers who thought they had found safety. Langanke watched from his Panther as the first flight of Thunderbolts rolled in. They came from the northwest, diving at shallow angles to line up their attacks. The lead aircraft released its bombs at perhaps 300 meters altitude, Twin explosions erupted somewhere ahead in the column, throwing debris and bodies into the air. Then the fighters pulled up, banked, and circled back for strafing runs. The sound was unlike anything Langanke had experienced. 850 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously produced a distinctive buzz, a vibration that seemed to shake the air itself. The bullets walked down the length of the column in neat rows, punching through thin-skinned vehicles like paper, igniting fuel tanks, killing men where they stood or crouched. A 50 caliber bullet is over half an inch in diameter and travels at nearly 3,000 feet per second. It does not wound, it destroys. Some German vehicles were equipped with anti-aircraft weapons. Das Reich had several half-tracks mounted with 20mm flak 38 guns, quick-firing weapons that could throw up a curtain of explosive shells. Some vehicles carried the Flak-Vierling, a quad mount of 20mm guns that was one of the most feared anti-aircraft weapons of the war. Crews manned these weapons and tried to fight back. The tracers reached up toward the diving aircraft, streams of fire that seemed to fill the sky. But the American pilots were experienced. They'd been flying ground attack missions for months. They knew how to approach from angles that minimized their exposure to anti-aircraft fire. They knew to target the flak vehicles first, silencing the most dangerous threats before turning to the defenseless trucks and tanks. They knew how to suppress anti-aircraft positions with bombs and rockets before making their strafing runs at low level. One by one, the anti-aircraft vehicles were destroyed. Their crews died at their guns or fled into the hedgerows. The defensive fire slackened, then stopped. The column was defenseless. Langanke later described the experience in an interview given decades after the war. He said the planes could then, quite calmly, pick target after target. Since there was no defense, it must have been a picnic for those guys in the air. For us on the ground, it was terrible. To make it even worse, artillery started shelling us. Here we were with quite a bit of combat capacity and no chance to use it, just being smashed. The attacks continued for over 6 hours. Flight after flight of Thunderbolts cycled through the target area. When one group expended its ordnance, another took its place. The pilots of the 405th Fighter Group flew sortie after sortie, returning to their airfield at Picauville on the Cotentin Peninsula to rearm and refuel, then flying back to continue the destruction. The group's records show they attacked the column from 3:10 in the afternoon until 9:40 that evening, a span of 6.5 hours. The British Royal Air Force also contributed to the carnage. Hawker Typhoons from 121 Wing, part of No. 83 Group of the 2nd Tactical Air Force, flew 99 sorties against the Roncey Pocket on July 29. 121 Wing comprised No. 174, 175, 245, and 184 squadrons under Wing Commander Charles L. Green. The Typhoon was a heavier aircraft than the Thunderbolt, designed as an interceptor but pressed into service as a ground attack platform. It carried 4 20mm cannons and could mount 8 rocket projectiles under its wings. The British pilots were experienced in low-level attack, having honed their skills in missions over occupied Europe since 1943. The Typhoons destroyed 17 tanks and damaged 27 more. They added their bombs and rockets and cannon fire to the destruction. Only one Typhoon was lost during the attack, and that was to debris thrown up by explosions rather than enemy fire. The pilot survived after making an emergency landing. As the afternoon wore on, the road became a charnel house. Burning vehicles blocked every avenue of movement. The smoke rose in thick columns that could be seen for kilometers, black pillars marking the death of an army. Bodies lay everywhere, in vehicles, beside vehicles, in the ditches. Some men who survived the initial attacks tried to flee on foot across the fields. Many were cut down by strafing fighters. Others made it to the hedgerows only to find themselves trapped, unable to move in any direction without being seen from the air. Langanke's Panther took hits during the attacks. The radio equipment mounted on the exterior of the turret caught fire. He had to lean out of the hatch, exposed to the chaos around him, and push the burning equipment off the vehicle with his hands. The tank itself remained operational, its armor too thick for machine gun bullets to penetrate. But it was trapped, unable to move through the wreckage that blocked the road in both directions. Inside the tank, Langanke and his crew waited for death. There was nothing else to do. They could not fight, they could not run. They could only sit in their steel box and listen to the sounds of destruction around them, waiting for the bomb or rocket that would finally find them, as darkness finally fell, bringing relief from the air. Attacks. Langanke made a decision. He could not stay on that road. By morning, the Americans would return. Anyone still caught in the open would die. The only chance was to break out during the night, to find a way through the American lines before dawn. He gathered whatever forces he could find in the darkness. 3 Panthers from his platoon remained operational. One had been abandoned earlier after breaking a sprocket wheel. Around 300 soldiers from various army units, not SS but regular Wehrmacht infantry, had congregated near his position. They were leaderless, demoralized, exhausted, frightened. Many had thrown away their weapons, some were wounded, but they were willing to follow anyone who seemed to know what to do. Langanke organized them into an ad hoc battle group. Just before midnight on July 29, they began their breakout attempt. Langanke led the way in his Panther. The plan was simple. They would push south towards Saint-Denis-le-Gast, then break through whatever American positions lay in their path. Speed was essential. They had to be through the American lines and into the safety of German-held territory before dawn brought back the aircraft. The fighting that followed was intense and chaotic. American forces had established roadblocks throughout the area, manned by infantry with bazookas and supported by Sherman tanks and tank destroyers. But their positions were not continuous. There were gaps in the line, places where the Americans had not yet established blocking positions. Langanke found those gaps, sometimes by luck, sometimes by shooting his way through. His Panther's 75mm gun roared again and again in the darkness. American vehicles that tried to block his path exploded under the impact of armor-piercing shells. At close range, the Panther's machine guns cut down infantry who emerged from the hedgerows to challenge them. The column pushed forward, leaving burning wrecks behind. Over the course of the night, Langanke personally destroyed 13 enemy tanks or tank destroyers, 4 anti-tank guns, 8 half-tracks, and 10 trucks. His crew fired until their ammunition was nearly exhausted. They pushed through American positions that should have stopped them, relying on surprise and audacity to overcome defenders who did not expect a major attack in the darkness. Behind Langanke, other German units saw the path he had opened and followed. A self-propelled anti-aircraft battery with 5 37mm guns escaped through the gap he had created. 2 Grill self-propelled guns, mounting 150mm infantry howitzers on Czech tank chassis, made it out. 3 Sturmgeschütz assault guns followed. 29 trucks carrying soldiers and equipment rolled through the breach. Hundreds of men who would otherwise have been killed or captured reached German lines because one 25-year-old officer had the initiative and courage to act. Langanke finally reached friendly lines in the early hours of July 30. He had been awake for over 48 hours. His uniform was filthy with smoke and mud and blood. His face was blackened. His hands were burned from pushing flaming equipment off his tank, but he had survived. More importantly, he had brought others out with him. The scale of the disaster at Roncey only became clear in the following days. Ground forces advancing through the pocket counted the wreckage. Post-battle verification confirmed 66 tanks and assault guns destroyed. 204 other vehicles, including half-tracks, trucks, artillery tractors, and horse-drawn wagons. 11 artillery pieces, from light infantry guns to heavy field howitzers. Total German vehicle losses in and around the pocket reached approximately 500 vehicles when all categories were counted. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich lost approximately two-thirds of its vehicles and heavy equipment in the pocket. Other units suffered similar or worse losses. American casualties were minimal. The 405th Fighter Group reported no aircraft shot down during the attack. The cost-benefit ratio was overwhelming. German casualties around Roncey reached approximately 1,500 killed and wounded, with 4,000 captured. The captured included men from some of Germany's most elite formations, soldiers who had fought from Moscow to Normandy. Many who surrendered were so demoralized that American units simply pointed them toward the rear and let them walk to prisoner collection points unguarded. There were not enough guards to handle them all. For the German army in Normandy, Roncey was a preview of worse disasters to come. 2 weeks later, many of the same units that escaped the Roncey Pocket would be caught again in the Falaise Pocket, an even larger encirclement that would destroy much of what remained of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army. The techniques that proved so deadly at Roncey, the combination of fast-moving armoured columns and overwhelming tactical air power, would be repeated again and again as the Allied armies swept across France. For Fritz Langanke, the breakout from Roncey earned him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military decorations. He was recommended for the award on August 7, 1944, just 9 days after the battle. The recommendation cited his destruction of numerous enemy vehicles, his rallying of 300 soldiers from scattered units, and his opening of an escape route that allowed many other units to reach safety. The award was officially granted on August 27. Langanke continued to fight. On December 25, 1944, he took command of the 2nd Company of SS Panzer Regiment II. He was promoted to SS Obersturmführer in January 1945. He led that company through the Ardennes Offensive, the desperate German counterattack that Americans call the Battle of the Bulge. He survived that battle too, though his division suffered another devastating defeat at the hands of the American 2nd Armored Division. The war ended for Langanke in May 1945. He was credited with 9 confirmed tank kills during his career, a figure separate from the 13 vehicles he destroyed during the Roncey breakout. He survived the war, unlike most of his comrades. He returned to his hometown of Gelsenkirchen, the industrial city in the Ruhr where he had been born on July 15, 1919. The pilots of the 405th Fighter Group continued their war as well. The group flew missions in support of the Allied advance across France, earning a distinguished unit citation for a mission in September 1944 when 2 squadrons attacked German tanks and vehicles near La Neuville-en-Saulnois, despite severe weather and heavy ground fire. They supported the defense against the German Ardennes offensive and the final push into Germany. The group flew its last combat mission on May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. The P-47 Thunderbolt remained in service until the end of the war and beyond. From D-Day to 5E Day, Thunderbolt pilots claimed to have destroyed 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. No other aircraft contributed more to the destruction of German military transport in Western Europe. The Thunderbolt served with air forces around the world into the 1950s, a testament to its rugged design and versatile capabilities. The village of Roncey itself bore the scars of the battle for years. When the 3rd Armoured Division passed through on July 30th, they found the streets so choked with wrecked vehicles that tanks could not drive through. A tank dozer had to clear a path before the advance could continue. General Rudolf Christoph Baron von Gersdorf, who arrived at the 7th Army Forward Command Post near Avranches on the afternoon of July 29, found what he called a disastrous situation. The Army's combat power had been broken. Units that had been formidable fighting forces just days earlier had ceased to exist as organized formations. The road to Avranches and beyond lay open to the Americans. Fritz Langanke lived until July 10, 2012, passing away just 5 days before what would have been his 93rd birthday. He gave interviews about his wartime experiences throughout his later years, including a detailed account published in World War II magazine in 2003. He spoke candidly about what he had witnessed and experienced, providing historians with one of the most vivid first-hand descriptions of what it was like to be on the receiving end of Allied tactical air power. His accounts were corroborated by official records and the testimony of other survivors, making them invaluable primary sources for understanding the human dimension of the Roncey disaster. For the men of the 405th Fighter Group, Roncey was their most notable action of the war. The destruction of an entire German armoured division's worth of equipment in a single afternoon demonstrated what tactical air power could achieve when conditions were right. The pilots returned to their base that evening knowing they had struck a devastating blow against the enemy. Many of them would remember that day for the rest of their lives. For Fritz Langanke and the other German survivors, Roncey was a lesson in the new realities of warfare. Courage and skill were not enough. Superior equipment was not enough. In an age of air power, survival depended on avoiding detection, moving at night, dispersing to avoid presenting concentrated targets, and above all, praying for bad weather. The clear skies over Normandy on July 29, 1944, had sealed the fate of thousands of German soldiers. The German army in 1944 was still a formidable force. Its soldiers were experienced, well-trained and determined. Many had fought for years and survived battles that would have broken lesser men. Its equipment, particularly tanks like the Panther and Tiger, was in many ways superior to what the Allies fielded. German tank guns could destroy Allied tanks at ranges where Allied guns could not reply. German armour was thick enough to shrug off hits that would have destroyed American Shermans. But none of that mattered when American and British aircraft could find and destroy German units almost at will. The Luftwaffe could no longer contest Allied air superiority over the battlefield. German divisions that moved by day were found and attacked. Convoys that should have brought supplies were destroyed on the roads. Reinforcements that should have reached the front were decimated before they arrived. The result was disasters like Roncey, repeated again and again throughout the summer of 1944. The fundamental problem for German commanders was that they were fighting an enemy they could not reach. They had the tanks, the guns, the experience. They had soldiers who had proven themselves in the harshest conditions imaginable. What they did not have was aircraft, and without aircraft, all their other advantages meant nothing. Consider what it meant to be a German tank commander trapped in that column. You have trained for years. You have fought across Europe. You know your vehicle intimately, its capabilities and limitations. You know that your gun can destroy any enemy tank on the battlefield. You have confidence in your skills and your comrades. And then you sit for 6 hours, watching aircraft destroy everything around you. You cannot fight back. You cannot run. You can only wait and hope that the next bomb does not find you. Consider what it meant to be an American pilot diving on that column. You have been trained to find and destroy the enemy. You have flown. Mission after mission over hostile territory, facing anti-aircraft fire and the ever-present risk of mechanical failure. You know that each mission might be your last, and then you find a target that seems too good to be true, a column of enemy vehicles stretching for kilometers, packed so tightly they cannot disperse. You make your attack runs methodically, professionally, destroying machines and killing men with every pass. You return to base knowing you have done your job, perhaps better than you ever will again. The contrast between these two experiences illustrates the fundamental asymmetry of modern warfare. One side holds the technological advantage. The other side dies. The wreckage at Roncey was eventually cleared. The village was rebuilt. Life returned to the Norman countryside. Today, visitors can walk the roads where the German column died, can stand in the fields where Thunderbolts made their strafing runs, can try to imagine what it must have been like to be trapped there as the bombs and bullets fell. Most cannot truly imagine it. The scale of the destruction, the helplessness of the victims, the mechanical efficiency of the killers overhead, these things defy ordinary understanding. What remains is the historical record, the after-action reports, the intelligence summaries, the photographs of burned vehicles and cratered roads. The testimony of survivors like Langanke, recorded decades later, preserved so that future generations might understand what happened on that July afternoon when American pilots found a target they could not miss, and German soldiers discovered that their vaunted weapons were useless against an enemy they could not reach. Roncey was not the largest battle of the Normandy campaign. It was not the bloodiest or the most strategically significant, but it was perhaps the clearest demonstration of what happens when an army loses control of the sky above its head. The German soldiers trapped on that road were brave men, many of them. Veterans of years of combat. They had weapons that could have destroyed any American tank. They had training and experience that should have made them formidable opponents. None of it mattered. They died because they could not hide from the aircraft above them. They died because their air force could not protect them. They died because modern war had become three-dimensional, and they were fighting in only two. That is the lesson of Roncey. It was true in 1944. It remains true today. The side that controls the air controls the battlefield below. Everything else is secondary. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.